Well, it's great to see everyone here tonight and our visitors as well. I've heard that there are some others who had intended to be here tonight, but that there's an accident on 77 and the interstate is shut down. So all of our brethren from Mooresville, several of them couldn't make it, which reminds me, I heard some good news this week, perhaps. I heard that they're resurrecting the train from Mooresville to Charlotte. So, hey, at some point, Rob and Jill, several of us from Mooresville, maybe we can take the train to church. So we'll see. We'll see if that comes. Rob sent out a message earlier this week that was celebratory in nature. This congregation has been in existence for 30 years. Can you believe that? That date had slipped my mind. I didn't realize that that anniversary was coming up. But Rob mentioned several things in that message that we should keep in mind about this congregation. Just think of the foresight of the people who started this congregation and the sacrifices that took place and all of the things, the impact that this congregation has had on the local community over those 30 years. So that's a special anniversary to celebrate. On a personal level, my family also had a milestone this past week. You see, it was 20 years ago that I moved to Mooresville and started with Lowe's. They had a little bit of a celebration for me last week at work. It was a couple months before the whole family had come down and we had been established, but it's hard to believe that it has been 20 years since I've been here. Man, where does the time go? I remember when I moved here, Rebecca was just 2 years old, and you know, now all three of our children are off on their own. But 20 years goes by so fast. But it has me thinking a little bit about things that happened 20 years ago. And when I think back on that time 20 years ago, one of the things I remember is just being lost. I remember coming to this area of North Carolina. I had lived for 10 years in Tennessee. Didn't really know where everything was. I didn't know 115 goes next to 177. I didn't know where the Walmart was. Certainly didn't know where this congregation. It took like 4 months to find this congregation. And that weird feeling of being lost in a new town, you don't know where you're at, you're trying to figure everything out. Aside from just the physical, I don't think smartphones were even invented then, if I remember correctly. So it was you couldn't just look on your GPS. But I remember beyond just the physical sense, I remember the strangeness of just not knowing everybody at work, not knowing the routines, building new relationships, and just a feeling of lost, and a feeling, in some ways, of questioning, did I just make a big mistake? Is somebody watching out over me? I'm here in this strange place. Am I in the right place? Am I on the right path? More recently, Rebecca and I took a trip to New York City about 2 months ago, and I remember that same feeling of getting lost. On the first day we were there, we decided to go from Times Square, where we were staying, to Chinatown, and you took the subway there, and then we realized once we got there that both our phones were about to die. And in this century, these times you use the GPS. It even tells you which subway to get on, and so we ended up getting on the subway, going the wrong direction toward, up. For those of you that don't know, downtown means down toward Manhattan. Uptown means up. So we were confused. We got on the subway going the wrong direction, and we thought we were in trouble. Fortunately, we figured it out, but I can remember that feeling of anxiousness and that feeling of being lost. And that feeling of being lost and alone is unfortunately very common. When I look at these tons of new apartment complexes that are going up in our local area, I think about all these families that are relocating here, all these young people that are relocating here that have that maybe alone, don't have connections, maybe don't have a church family. I think of the concept of being lost and alone. Even for those of us in the church, even here, there are phases in your life where you kind of have that feeling of lost and alone. It can be with phases of life where things change, different changes of routine, maybe the loss of a loved one, maybe lifestyle changes, maybe retirement, just an uncertain situation where all of a sudden you don't know what to do next. And you're wondering, does God see me? Is God with me? Tonight I'd like to draw your attention to Psalms chapter 139. We'll be there tonight. As I read this psalm, it made me think of those times in Psalm 139. And there's a couple lessons we can learn from Psalms 139 that can give us comfort in these situations and reassurance and some practical things that we can move forward with during the upcoming week. I believe this portion of Scripture is written for the explicit purpose that we can read it and reflect on some of the essential truths about the world we live and about God Himself. So I'm going to read for you Psalm 139. It says, "O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know when I sit down and when I rise up. You discern my thoughts from afar. You search out my path and my lying down, and are acquainted with my ways. Even before a word is on my tongue, behold, O Lord, you know it altogether. You hem me in behind and before, and lay your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is high, I cannot attain it. Where shall I go from your spirit? Or where shall I flee from your presence? If I ascend to the heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you are there. If I take the wings in the morning, you are there, and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, you are there. Even there your hand shall lead me, and your right hand shall hold me. If I say, surely the darkness shall cover me, and the light about me be night, even the darkness is not dark to you. The night is bright as the day, for darkness is as light with you. For you formed my inner parts, you knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works, my soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my uniform substance. In your book were written, every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when as yet there were none of them. How precious to me are your thoughts, O God! How vast the sum of them! If I would count them, they are more than the sand. I awake, I am still with you. Oh, that you would slay the wicked, O God! O men of blood, depart from me. They speak against you with malice intent. Your enemies take your name in vain. Do I not hate those who hate you, O Lord? Do I not loathe those who rise up against you? I hate them with complete hatred. I count them my enemies. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts, and see if there be any grievous ways in me, and lead me in the way of everlasting." What a beautiful psalm that is. Certainly, there's a segment in the middle that we hear often quoted, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But a couple lessons that we can take away from this psalm, and I hope you'll remember this week. First of all, verse 1 through 6, the theme of that really is God knows us. God knows us intimately. Several years ago, there was a really popular show called Cheers. Now, this is showing how old I am. You might remember Cheers. It was a show that was, I think it was in the 80s. It was these random strangers that came together in a bar, and through this bar, they developed a relationship because they met. And the song was, be glad there's one place in the world where everybody knows your name, and they're always glad you came. You want to go where everybody knows your name. That need to be known, where somebody knows your name, somebody knows you. Well, the reality is we don't need a bar of strangers to be known. Our God knows us much, much, much deeper than that, than any celebratory bar scene. Because, those people in the bar, you think they know you, they really don't know you. They just know your name. We have a God that truly knows us. You think about it in verse 2 of what we just read. It talks about, you know my sitting down and my rising up. You understand my thoughts. Verse 3, you comprehend my path and my ways. Verse 4, there's not a word on my tongue that you did not know. Verse 5, you laid your hand on me and helped me. And verse 6, such knowledge is too wonderful for me. I don't deserve it. Sometimes there are times when the words just won't come out. And sometimes we're talking to people and you intend to say something, but it just didn't come out that way. Certainly that happens in public speaking. It happens in interpersonal relationships. It happens in our prayers. But God understands what we need and how we feel and what we mean and what's on our heart, even when it's difficult for us to say it clearly. That's how well God knows us. God knows what we need. We know in Matthew 7, verse 9 through 12, it says, "For which of you, if your son asks for bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for fish, will give him a snake? If you then who are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good gifts to those who ask him? So in everything, do to others as you would have done to you, for this sums up the law and the prophets." So just when you think about this psalm, remember that God knows you better than you know you. We have a God who knows us, and that is something we can certainly be thankful for. The other thing we can take away from the verse 7 through 12 of this psalm, is that God is with us everywhere. God is with us everywhere. There's a common saying that has become popular recently of, "I see you." Have you ever heard anybody say that? "Hey, I felt seen," or "I see you. You're not marginalized. I see you. I've noticed you." The reality is God sees you all the time. And this leads into this concept that God is everywhere and can see you everywhere. I always enjoy watching the small children play games, and we've been blessed to have several young children through this congregation, and what a joy it is to see them running around and to watch them. Like I said, I remember when we came to this congregation and Rebecca was only 2, and one of the games that I remember we played is we'd say, let's play hide and seek. And so they'd say, "Okay, I'm going to go hide," and their hiding to a small child would be like this. They would, "Okay, I'm ready." What they didn't realize, they thought they were hidden just because they couldn't see you, right? But they didn't realize in their small minds that that's not hiding. Just because you can't see me doesn't mean I can't see you. And that's the peekaboo game. But sometimes we have the same misunderstanding about God. When we can't see God or when we feel alone, that doesn't mean God can't see us. Psalms 139 reminds us again that God sees us everywhere and is with us everywhere. And in verse 8, it talked about ascending to heaven, up into the skies. God is there. And then it talked about the uttermost parts of the sea. It's interesting to me that there's scripture that talks about the uttermost parts of the sea when they really couldn't go to the see the uttermost parts of the sea. But he talks about uttermost parts of the sea, even those depths, God is there. And then it talks about in verse 12, "Darkness shall not hide me," in verse 12. If you're a faithful Christian, this verse provides comfort because it means that God sees us and notices us and is with us when we're persecuted for righteousness, when we're in situations that make us wonder, is God here? Does God see the struggles that I'm going through? And if we make choices according to his will. I've thought about this. This also should be a sobering thought for those who somehow think that God only lives at the church building. So just like that toddler, some people want certain parts of their lives to be hidden. It's like, "God, I want you to watch me carefully when I'm here on Sunday, but not watch me so close at work on Monday, or not watch me so close on Saturday night, or not watch me close in this situation." That's not how it works. God is with us, and God sees us all the time. So that is a blessing and a comfort for those of us as we strive to do his will. But it's a warning and something to remember when we're not following God's will. And then the middle part of that chapter, verse 13 through 16, reminds me that each person is wonderfully made. God's creation is pretty amazing, and we see that on display here in the springtime. This was a beautiful afternoon, and I'm sure as you go out and you see the trees budding, you see the flowers coming up, you see the grass, it seems like you mow it and you have to mow it again. Everything's growing and things are changing, and God's creation is certainly revealed. But mankind was the pinnacle of God's creation. And then has these verses, the verse that talks about God knew you when you were in your mother's womb. That's amazing to me. And you think about recently, the technology has come about so that you can see the babies in their mother's womb and you can see them moving, and the pictures, that's only come about in the past couple of years. Now, but before, you got a VHS tape with some grainy images. That's what we have of our children. But now you get this like color, 3D, amazing videos of your child in the mother's womb. Isn't that amazing? And isn't it revealing to us how incredible God is, and how those, when it talks about in verse 13, you formed my inward parts, covered in my mother's womb. Verse 14 says, I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. How important is it for us to remember this when we lack confidence? When we think something physical, I'm starting to get a gray beard, or all of us have something about us that we don't like. But we got to remember that God, each of us were fearfully and wonderfully made by God's purpose. He made each of us in a unique way according to his designs, with different skills, different abilities, different tendencies. Each of us has a purpose. It says in verse 15, my frame was not hidden from you. I was made in secret. And in verse 16, your eyes saw my substance. Verse 16, again, the days were fashioned for me, yet when as yet there were none. Of course, this doesn't mean predestination, but it does mean God knows. God knows foreknowledge of what we'll do. As a parent, we can look at our children and say, oh, he's going to be a talker, or she's going to be great with money, or she's going to be, you can kind of tell where kids are going. In the same way, God knows, or to a greater extent, God knows us. These verses should cause us to celebrate our uniqueness and understand that this is part of God's plan, that we are all unique. The back portion of this chapter, verse 7 through 24, seems to not fit in the chapter. We've talked about how God is always with us. We've talked about how each of us are fearfully and wonderfully made. And then we get into this section that talks about, oh, that you slay the wicked, O God, verse 19. And then they speak a bit against you wickedly. Your enemies take your name in vain. Don't we have people in our world who behave in this way? People that you interact with that live in an overtly wicked way, take the Lord's name in vain. So sometimes we feel, as the psalmist did, of, wouldn't it be better if they didn't exist? Or wouldn't it be better, that you, Lord, take vengeance on those who are sinful towards you. After reflecting on how wonderful God is, the writer just has a hard time reconciling how wonderful God is. He has a time reconciling that with the wickedness that he sees. Dylan Murphy gave a really great lesson earlier, and before that, a Bible class up in the White House on Jonah. And we remember the story of Jonah and how when God directed Jonah to preach to the Ninevites, he went in the opposite way. We know the Ninevites were a wicked people, and Jonah expressed these feelings kind of like the psalmist here about how difficult it was to reconcile those feelings. One thing to notice about this verse and the story of Jonah is that judgment is for God to decide, not us. It wasn't for Jonah to decide. It wasn't for the psalmist to decide. It's for God to decide. And in this, we don't read here that the psalmist, that David took those actions into his own hands. He just was expressing those feelings to God. We may express our feelings about those who are wicked, but we cannot take vengeance on them. Judgment belongs to God. And then verse 24, it ends with, if there is any wicked way in me, lead me to everlasting. We should always be open to God's leading. So that's what we should take away. When you think about this Psalms 139 and what we've read through tonight, we can think of a couple things. We've talked about God knows us in a way that no one else knows us. God's with us everywhere. We're wonderfully made by him, and that vengeance is the Lord's. can and should express our feelings to him. We have that close relationship with him, but ultimately vengeance is the Lord's, and he is the judge. Perhaps you are feeling alone in this world. You may be surrounded by people who don't seem to follow God's law, wondering if God even sees what's going on, what you're struggling with. I want to think about yesterday. I was we took a trip to Boone. I hadn't been up there in a long time, and we were in an antique store. And during this antique store, I was browsing the aisles, and I found there was a bookshelf with yearbooks in the antique store. And some of these yearbooks were from the 1930s. And it was fascinating to read these yearbooks from, middle schools, high schools back in the 30s and 40s, see all these youthful faces, people signed other people's yearbooks, and just to reflect on, what was it like to be a kid back then? What were their hopes? What were their dreams? What was ahead of them? And I know one of the yearbooks had a senior next to their baby picture. Like I had a baby picture next to the senior portrait for every senior. And it was interesting. You look at the young faces. I wondered what happened to these people, through their dreams as they begin to grow up. But then, I thought about each of those babies, how cute each of those babies are, right? One thing that I think of today that maybe we can apply this week is think of the person that just frustrates you the most this week. Maybe somebody you're going to meet at work tomorrow. I've got a few. And others that are maybe a thorn in your side. Wouldn't this world be different if we thought of everyone as each person in chapter 139, verse 14? Each one of those people are fearfully and wonderfully made by God. Each one of us are fearfully and wonderfully made by God. That means all of you, and that means all that we interact with. So that's something that we can take away and we can learn from this psalm. Let's think about how we interact with people. Let's think about what God has done for us, how He knows us, how each person we interact with is fearfully and wonderfully made. Some of them may, because of their choices, or perhaps because of no one has shared with them the gospel, they have an opportunity to come and to be a part of the congregation and to become a Christian. They need someone to lead them there. They need someone to share. I hope that we can be that person this week, during the upcoming week. And so I hope you remember and reflect on that. The things that we've talked about, though, if you're not a Christian, then you're not in a positive relationship with God. You were certainly fearfully made, and God loves you, but He created you with the ability to make a choice, whether to accept God's love or reject it, whether to follow His commandments or reject them. And it's our desire here, and it's God's desire, that you decide to accept God's forgiveness and love, to repent and be baptized in a similar way. If there are any here that need to be restored, now is a great time to do that. And we hope that you will do that as we come together and sing. Brother Gordon.